Invasion, infection, indescribable horror. These are some key factors into the worlds we have covered and just how unsurvivable their scenarios can be. Denizens of hell and mountains of muscle can be a legitimate concern to your health and well-being. But if there is something that always seems more realistic and not stranger than fiction, it's the ever-pervasive threat of disease, and even more horrifying, genetically modified strains of disease and what it can turn the world into. We have discussed weaponized viruses before, but more times than not, they had been isolated incidents that resulted in a zombie outbreak multiple times. But what if the end results were not resulting in a shambling corpse or hyperactive infected? What if the textbook definition of a mad scientist just wanted to watch the population crumble and as a result, the world burn? Well, that's the subject of today's video. This week, we cover the third-person boots-on-the-ground version of Destiny, stay out of the dark zone, what is single-player, looter-shooter, the most American way to start a pandemic, keep your hands off my stack, get down with the sickness, this disease is very cash money, not quite the green flu, what inspired you to make this game? Disease.
Money!
Game itself. This week, we are telling you why you wouldn't survive the Division's dollar flu outbreak. So every year in the good old US of A, we come together with family and friends to mount up a gigantic feast of a wide assortment of foods and celebrate everything we are thankful for. And then, a few hours later, we huddle up outside in the cold, waiting in front of a store chain to almost kill each other in a huddle in order to get a percentage off of a grade F television or blender. This national holiday and embodiment of the American way is called Thanksgiving, Black Friday. And it was during this most American of traditions that a certain scientist, Dr. Gordon Amherst, devised a way to thin the herd, so to speak. With how rampant and out of control humanity had become with their greed, Amherst had become sick and tired of his own species, believing that Mother Nature needed a bit of help in evening the playing ground, and also being a staunch follower in the belief of natural selection, and furthermore, the survival of the fittest. Amherst went and became Dwight Schrute with some drastic follow-through as a mad scientist.
There's too many people on this earth. We need a new plague.
Being a virologist and immunologist, Dr. Gordon Amherst used the advancement of DNA digitization to generate lab-grade pathogens of just about any virus exponentially faster. By procuring a strain sample of the smallpox virus, he was able to bioengineer a supervirus called smallpox variola chimera. While this was created in total secrecy, he concocted it with no vaccination or cure in mind. Now, the idea of any kind of strain of smallpox getting out is horrifying in its own right. But what Gordon made was far worse upon inspection and execution. It could incubate within a host extremely fast, and while it is taking hold within a victim's body, can be highly infectious to anyone else around while showing no outward symptoms at first, giving the infection that much more of a deadlier spread. Acting like a virus that somebody playing Plague Inc. would create and use strategically, the virus will show symptoms akin to the common influenza. To not cause any red flags and avoid appropriate medical and biohazard procedures, the virus also contained corresponding pathogens of other deadly diseases, such as H1N1, swine flu, which is a strain of H1N1, dengue, hantavirus, Marburg, and Ebola.
You have to have Ebola to know the way.
A defining factor with the virus was that it could remain on non-organic surfaces for much longer than most infections, which is exactly what the mad scientist would capitalize on when executing his genocidal plan by contaminating dollars and coins in the New York City area right before Black Friday in the year of 2015. So that during the savage flurry of spending and saving, the exchange of money would prove to spread amongst the city's population fast and furious, thusly eventually giving it the more easier to say namesake of the green virus, or the dollar flu. It wasn't until a few days afterwards that people started showing outward symptoms with doctors and at hospitals that medical professionals assumed it was just a strain of the swine flu. That was until people started dying soon after in pockets across the United States. Upon further inspection, the CDC likened the outbreak as a resurgence of smallpox and administered a smallpox vaccine in the hopes that the potential pandemic would be quelled. But those hopes fell on deaf medical ears. People started dying left and right, with 95% of the world's population being susceptible to the disease, and the other 5%, much like the green swine flu, or pathogen HK, could have people genetically immune and resistant to its symptoms, but still be able to asymptomatically carry the virus and spread it to non-resistant people. The US government and other medical, armed, and law enforcement organizations attempted to institute major quarantines across the country, and soon this disease spread to 147 countries around the globe, mostly due to the fact that New York City being the ground zero of this pandemic and so much tourism and business stemming to and from there. This would be a covert pandemic that Amherst had wanted all along, intentionally making it where at least 10% of the world's population could survive. And not to value his own life above everyone else's, he injected himself with the virus and subsequently died from it, taking with him the extensive knowledge of the virus and the best chances at a vaccine or cure that could have been made. While Tom Clancy's The Division capitulated on the missions and struggles of the Division's agents coming to the aid of Sarah, trying to find samples of the original pathogen to discern a cure in the remains of Amherst laboratory, only to be betrayed by the rogue Keener to eventually weaponize it in the midst of the chaos that comes with the dark zones and quarantines of Manhattan. While the efforts in Manhattan did bear fruit of a possible cure that was shipped to DC, while the dollar flu was starting to dissipate slowly, either by the infected dying or the microbes on the surfaces that they inhabited dying off as well, but not before the government unleashed chemical DC-62 to pretty much deep clean the nation's capital to make sure the virus was gone. However, this rather untested yellow powder did eradicate the virus when coming into contact with it. It was also extremely toxic, and anything that came in contact with it required extensive decontamination, and for anyone that breathed it in would pretty much suffer immediate death. So basically replacing a man-made viral infection with a man-made deadly poison, except with a faster means of death. While DC itself seemed to be rid of the dollar flu, nearby mass quarantines of DC civilians that had been displaced to locations like Roosevelt Island would still keep the potential threat of a further outbreak alive. A leading officer of the JTF Joint Task Force, Colonel Ridgway, had become ruthless with the infected, seeing that they were lost causes with no hope for a cure, and saw to keeping them stuck in a further quarantine while also withholding all food and medicine from them so they would starve and or die off faster. Although he was imprisoned by the commander of the JTF, he was eventually freed by the deserter faction, the True Sons, who, in their own regard, seek to murder any living infected to completely snuff out the dollar flu. In response to this terroristic measure and the unethical death of her daughter within the quarantine, former DC prosecutor Emmeline Shaw saw to forming and leading the Outcasts, a band of infected individuals hell-bent on getting even with the world by either spreading their infection or simply murdering those not worthy of the virus. Emmeline Shaw was a perfect candidate to lead, as she was an asymptomatic carrier and, without succumbing to its horrible symptoms, could easily spread the dollar flu at will. Now, with all of these factors set into place, this is where we will cut the divide between the game's lore and our own reality, as we so often do. Now, let's just say, what if the dollar flu were to suddenly happen within the upcoming Black Friday festivities in Manhattan? According to New York City tourism reports from 2018, nearly 40 million tourists pouring in and out of the Big Apple, 13.6 million of which coming internationally. While those numbers don't factor completely into a holiday shopping bloodbath, it is safe to say it could still be a defining factor that even if one of those international travelers or even a US citizen were to shop and exchange the tainted cash, considering tourism also brings in a 44 billion cash flow for the city of New York, they will easily be a carrier in the coming days with that much money going around. With the not so good doctor-specific engineering to at least wipe out 90% of a given populace into a hybrid of many deadly and hard to counter strains that wouldn't show up immediately on any health professional's radar due to not so severe initial symptoms, much like a game of Plague Inc., the infected numbers would be in the thousands, if not millions, within a few days due to the virus's virility in hosts and non-organic surfaces, meaning those people who touch that cash are fully infected. Whatever they touched in a New York subway are infected. The transportation they used just by merely touching anything are infected. Hell, even inhaling the contaminated air near a person could have you infected in a moment's time. And without a little cleansing fire or poison, things are going to stay pretty sickly before symptoms start to arise. Once the drastic side of these symptoms start to arise, agencies like the CDC or World Health Organization would start trying to administer vaccines for smallpox or swine flu. But that's because they would assume that's what the diseases are because of this nature nature of the hybrid of so many other diseases. But this would prove to be ineffective as the death toll would slowly start to tick forward. Now, being infected with the dollar flu is practically a death sentence in its own right, with how fast it spread through the unknowing populace. But beyond the medical side of the pandemic are the human and retaliation factors. While hastened quarantines will be set up, the ensuing chaos creating dark zones and factions of people reveling in the anarchy of lawlessness will prove to also be a detriment to your own survival. Armed forces being quickly overwhelmed by the sheer number of infected and then procuring their left behind weapons and ammunition to do whatever they want with it, when they want with it. Insane and strong men and women who will kill, rape, and steal to their heart's content. People with the ideals to weaponize the virus further, despite a large majority of the world's populations already succumbing to it and just trying to discern a cure or vaccine to this dastardly hybrid of diseases would be hard to ascertain in all of this chaos. Considering most people watching this are most likely ones to not know how to carry themselves in a lawless state of society, most of us would probably hold ourselves up in scarcely defended quarantine zones. The severity of the disease could see military personnel either receiving the command to or themselves resorting to drastic measures, meaning executing the infected and burning their bodies, or in the division's case, letting them die without treatment or sustenance, slowly dying to hunger or the dollar flu itself. Trying to rebel against them could see you riddled with bullets, but you could also see to infecting them yourselves. Either way, death will be at hand for you. Factions of people would arise somewhat similar to the division, but with less catchy names and a hell of a lot more chaos. The people of the outcasts, feeling like the world had betrayed them and left them to dry as infected, can be seen donning flamethrowers to exterminate you and burn you to death, but are so devoted to the will of their leader can even resort to suicide bombing you as well. And if you're in that small percentage of people that are immune to the disease's effect, the cult-like group could view you as a god and worship you. You just better hope that a military sniper that knows of your status doesn't assassinate you before you can revel in the godhood. Factions like the hyenas could arise as aimless, stalwart people who just want to cause panic and chaos and do whatever the hell they want. People who have revolted from their armed organizations like the True Sons, who will use their tactical know-how, training, and weaponry to overwhelm and eradicate anyone still carrying the dollar flu disease, and kill anyone who gets in their way. Another armed but more trained faction like the Black Tusk, maybe even a foreign power not affected by the virus, could swoop into the country and attempt to overthrow the current government to set up a new world order by any means necessary. So they're going to be using advanced technology, weaponry to wipe you out. And you're going to be in a sickly state, so you're not going to be able to defend yourself. Now, usually I would say resorting to napalm and nuclear attacks to wipe out the disease would be a necessary evil, but the use of the DC-62 gas would instead be implemented. But even then, the sheer toxicity of this gas would be just as bad, or even worse than a flash of hellfire from above. Merely inhaling it would mean your death at a rapid rate. Even the toxicity of it can burn your flesh to a heightened degree. So it seems that when this disease is released, you would either be one of the thousands or even millions besieged by the pandemic, infected unknowingly at first, and then dying a painful internal death, being killed in the anarchist riots in major metropolitan areas and dark zones, starved to death in quarantine, burned, shot, or poisoned if you are a carrier of the disease, forcefully or accidentally infected by people with the disease while waiting for a vaccine that will most likely never reach the broader public, even if it is made, or succumbing to the evil that is man. When law and order are gone and chaos rules, gamers rise up. We aren't all loot sluts looking for higher gear with infinite lives, and we're not fully trained soldiers at that. Some of you might be. Thank you for your service. So I think it's safe to say, with everything considered, none of us would survive with how horrible this disease is and what it turns society into. That about wraps up a more medical with a dash of armed conflict outlook on the survival chances in Tom Clancy's The Division's Little Dollar Flu. Did the disease pay the bills? Did I not cover enough? Would you rather see a different franchise? Let me know in the comments. If you want to support the channel, you can. Donate to my Patreon, become a member on the channel to get exclusive pins and stickers for live stream chat. Donate during my live streams and you can see your name pop up at the end of my videos like right here, with different tiers of recognition to give you a small thanks. Be sure to check out the rest of the Why You Wouldn't Survive series, and maybe even some zombie sins if you want to see what's wrong with the best and worst of the world's best and worst zombie movies. Until next time, I'm Zackass, aka Wow Such Gaming. Don't forget to don't fucking shoot me in the dark zone. Stay wow!